The battle is over. The screaming has finally stopped, and now lying scattered across the mud and the grass are tens of thousands of dead bodies. So what happens next? Who cleans all of this up? Where do all of those corpses actually go? The answer is one of the grimmest and honestly one of the strangest stories in all of history. A single big medieval battle could kill a staggering number of people in one afternoon. At the Battle of Towton in England, some accounts claim that nearly 28,000 men died in just a few hours of snow and blood. That is a small city's worth of corpses suddenly lying in a single field. And in a world with no machines, no trucks, and no morgues, someone still had to deal with every single one of them. The first rule of a battlefield was brutally simple. The side that won owned the dead. The victors stayed on the field while the losers ran for their lives. And that meant the winners got the first pick of absolutely everything the dead had left behind. Because long before anyone was ever buried, the bodies were going to be robbed. And they were robbed of everything. Soldiers and local peasants swarmed across the field, stripping the corpses bare. Armor and swords were worth a small fortune, so they were taken first. Then the clothes, the boots, the belts, the rings, the coins, anything at all that had value. Even the arrows were pulled from the ground and collected to be shot again. By the time the looters were finished, many bodies were left completely naked in the mud. But they didn't even stop at clothing. Sometimes they took the teeth. Healthy teeth, pulled from the mouths of young dead soldiers, were actually valuable because they could be turned into dentures for the wealthy. In fact, for centuries afterward, teeth would be looted from battlefields by the sackful. The dead, it turned out, were worth money right down to their mouths. But humans were not the only ones drawn to a fresh battlefield. Within hours, the sky above began to fill with crows and ravens, circling, then landing to feed. And when night fell, the wolves, the wild dogs, and even the village pigs crept in to scavenge. To medieval people, this was a true horror, but also a grim and painfully familiar sight. The raven feeding on the fallen became one of the darkest symbols of war itself. So who actually buried the enormous mountain of bodies? Usually, that terrible job fell to the local villagers and to the church. Peasants from the nearby lands were rounded up, sometimes by force, to do the grim work. Monks and priests arrived to bless the dead and pray for their souls. But burying tens of thousands of bodies by hand with nothing but shovels was a monstrous task that could drag on for days. In the end, there was really only one practical solution: giant mass graves. Huge pits were dug right there, next to the battlefield. And the stripped, naked bodies were carried over and lowered, or sometimes simply thrown inside. If there was time, they were laid out with a little care, packed head to toe to save precious space. But often they were just piled in, layer upon layer, and covered over with a mound of earth. And we know all of this because we have actually found them. At Towton, archaeologists uncovered one of these very mass graves, packed tightly with skeletons. And the bones told a truly brutal story. Skulls split wide open, faces shattered, terrible wounds from axes and swords, far more damage than would ever be needed just to kill a man. These soldiers had been cut down without a shred of mercy and then buried in a heap. But not everyone ended up thrown into a pit. If you happened to be rich, your death looked very different indeed. Knights and nobles were often identified by the coats of arms painted on their shields, then carried off the field and given a proper, honored burial. Sometimes their bodies were even boiled down to the bare bones, so they could be carried all the way home to rest in a family tomb. In death, just as in life, the rich and the poor went to very different places. And when there were simply far too many bodies to ever bury, there was one last option: fire. Enormous funeral pyres were built to burn the dead, especially when people were terrified of disease, because a field full of rotting corpses was more than just a horror to look at. It was a genuine deadly hazard. The stench alone could be smelled for miles around, and the dead could quietly spread sickness among the living. And sometimes no one came for them at all. If a battle had been fought in some remote place, or if the few survivors had fled far away, the bodies were simply left exactly where they fell. They rotted out in the open, picked apart slowly by the animals and the weather, until nothing was left but scattered bones. Some medieval battlefields became open, silent graveyards for years and years. But believe it or not, the story does not even end with burial. Because centuries later, something genuinely astonishing happened. As farming grew hungrier and hungrier for fertilizer, people actually began digging up the old battlefields for their bones. Millions of bones from famous battles were dug up, shipped far away, ground down into fine powder, and then spread across the fields to help grow the crops. The soldiers who died in battle, in the very end, helped to feed the future. So what really happened to the bodies after a medieval battle? They were robbed, stripped, and picked completely clean. They were fed to the crows and shoveled into pits. They were burned, forgotten, and sometimes even dug up again a whole lifetime later. It is grim, there is no doubt about it, but it is also a powerful reminder of just how brutal and how strange the real story of the past truly was. The glory of battle filled all the history books, but the bodies, they were left behind in the mud, and history for the most part simply looked away.